speaking to going co-ed, you were on the committee for it, but you're also a former student.
Right.
How did you balance that feeling? There's two different existences.
I told the committee this, because I had two daughters at that time, one in high school and one in junior high. And they could have gone to a number of schools, tuition-free. Agnes Scott, Presbyterian schools then offer that. And talked to them that neither one of my two daughters wanted to go to a women's college. So I said, you know, if neither of my daughters, who I think are the type young women that I would like to come to Queens, won't go, then am I going to vote to keep it single sex, even though I did think it was wonderful. I enjoyed it and still have really, really close friends from my class that year. So.
It's the story of Dixie Griffin. Dixie Griffin was a biology major, and I would have to go back and check. I should have done that. In 96, 97, somewhere around there. Dixie, as far as we can tell, was the first Fulbright scholar at Queens, when it was still Queens College. Dixie was from a small town in southern Georgia. She had been preceded here actually by another outstanding biology student, Sharon McDaniel. They're both physicians now. Sharon is a pediatrician down in Panhandle of Florida, and Dixie, as far as I know, is practicing back in her hometown in southern Georgia. But Bill Thompson, who was head of the international program at the time, was trying to encourage people to apply for things like the Marshall, the Rhodes, the Fulbright, and whatnot. And not really offhandedly, because Dixie was such an outstanding student, said, let's give it a try. And so we kind of, not really the last minute, but it was a little bit rushed since nobody had done a Fulbright before, that we were able to pull faculty together to write the appropriate recommendations, got Dixie to fill out all the forms in terms of what her goals were and things like that. And you send it off, and then it's just wait and see. And so, you remember the day. Gosh, didn't know this would happen. I'm standing in front of the biology class in Walker 209. And she pops through the door at the end of the hall with this huge smile. Oh, get her. She can't. Right. Wow. So she came, I went out in the hall and I said, did you get it? She said, yes, I did. I said, fantastic, fantastic. And so I took her into the class and I said, ladies and gentlemen, here is a Fulbright scholar.
Near the end of the game, our sports information director handed me a piece of paper, and she asked me to make an announcement. And the announcement was that we wished well the future endeavors of our scorekeeper, who was several seats past me, because he had just, this was right when we were entering the Iraq War, and he was in the Army Reserves, and they were, and he had been called up, so he was about to go to Germany, and who knew where after that. But shortly after that tournament, he was leaving school, he was going to do this. I had no idea. So she hands me this, with his name, the text of the announcement, and I was sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, because I look at him and I'm thinking, I can't imagine him in full gear, much less on the battle lines. I mean, this is, it was really, one of those moments where, I myself was choked up. And so I made the announcement at whatever interval there was. And by this time, the game was pretty much decided. So I made the announcement. He stood up to acknowledge the crowd. The entire crowd came to its feet. And the Millersville guys began chanting, USA, USA, and got the entire building to chant that. And it was, it gives me chills just to think about it. There was just this incredible spirit that came from the people who were there, and this kind of uniting beyond a basketball game that pointed us towards something even larger. And I was so privileged to be there, to hear that and to feel that. And I remember thinking, this is the kind of send-off that he needs. This is something that says, we're with you as you go into this next stage. And some months, maybe a year later, I think he came back to campus, and he had survived. He'd had, you know, a variety of experiences. But I remember just feeling such relief, you know, that when he came back. But it was such an honor to make that announcement and to be part of that experience in that moment.
What made you stay here?
Well, now, isn't that a funny thing? I suppose it was a whole collection of things. There was one thing is, much to your surprise, you get invested in a place. I shouldn't use invested, but I use it in honor of the Wharton School. And so from the very beginning, Queens has constantly been in this process of reinvention. And that's the nature of who we are. And so I got on all these committees trying to come up with different, there was a Gen Ed committee like there is today and all this sort of stuff. And so I hated to leave with the work undone. And so I thought, well, I'll hang around for another year or two to see if we can accomplish something. Before you know it, a year or two turns into a decade or two. So.
Did you ever go on the job market?
No, I never did. Partly it was shell shock from being on the market to begin with, because it's terrible, at least to me. I mean, we used the phrase, what am I trying to think of, when you would go to the American Historical Association and it was like a cattle market. That's not what we said, but that's what it was. You're standing in line with everybody else, you're clutching your little dossier, and you get interviewed after interview and all this sort of stuff. So partly it was that, no, I have no desire to go back on the market. Secondly, I kind of liked it here. And I thought, so we'll see what happens. And the other thing is, at least for me, I like to sort of do what I like to do. And I don't like being in boxes. And I know many colleagues of mine, I was trained as a German historian. And so what they do is, my colleagues, they do German history, and they do some more German history. They do some more German history. And that's it. And here, the problem or the advantage to being in a small school is you do German history, you do American history, you do medieval history, you do whatever you're doing. And I found that attractive. I like doing it. I like doing different stuff. And so that's another reason so that I stayed. And plus, they never threw me out. And so that's always, why do you stay in a particular place? Well, they didn't catch me yet, right?
Dr. Pamela Davies, the president of Queens. She started in July of 2002, though I knew her as dean of the McCall School before that. So I'm glad for the chance to go back and reflect on our time together. As I stated before, I've worked with her now 3 times longer than I did for Billy Wireman, and it's just flown by, and we've had a lot of great times together. And so I've come up with some things. So first off, I may have alluded to this when we taped before, but recently, probably in February of this year, she received an award, the Charlotte Woman of the Year. And her kids were in town, and both her daughter and her son-in-law, Ashley and Nick Cheek, are Queens alums. And Nick was walking around campus, and he just said, "Mom, the campus looks amazing." He goes, "I've never seen it look more beautiful." He hadn't yet seen the addition to Belk Chapel. And they're talking, and she said, "Yeah, it is great." She said, "There's a part of me that fears my legacy is going to be facilities." And then as she was telling me this, then she got distracted and moved on to something else. But I'm glad I thought of it, and I went back and I said, "You didn't finish that thought." I said, "What do you want your legacy to be?" And she said, "I really want my legacy to be strategy." And I think it definitely has been, though facilities are very tangible. It's what we see when we walk around, drive by, but all of that's been undergirded by strategy.
I would like us to really recognize ourselves as who we are, and that is a teaching institution, and really put our efforts into that. while rewarding whatever service or scholarship, but still having the students up front always. And I know our latest strategic plan has moved to having the students up front, and I'm happy with that. I think that sometimes Queens doesn't recognize what all is going on here, and maybe if Queens could be a little more self-reflective in terms of rewarding the people who are doing great work here, and recognizing them. So one thing I think is clear from the psychology literature is that recognition is way more important in terms of a reward than anything monetary. Of course, monetary rewards are always nice, but if a person is given recognition, that is so much more meaningful. And so I think that's huge. And people get busy and it doesn't happen. But it's like a gold mine to just sit and say, okay, what have people done? And let's really, really recognize the fact that they've achieved something for Queens, for themselves, but for Queens as well.